So there are several different types of respiration. External respiration is the diffusion of gases in the lungs. Internal respiration is the diffusion of gases at the body tissues, at the capillary beds, and both are going to involve physical properties of gas as well as the composition of alveolar gas. You need to know about Dalton's law of partial pressure, which in short says this: the total pressure which is exerted by a mixture of gases is the sum of the pressures exerted by each gas. So the pressure of a gas is going to determine the rate at which it will diffuse from region to region. When you talk about partial pressure, you're talking about the pressure exerted by each gas in a mixture, and it is going to be directly proportional to its percentage in the mixture. The composition of alveolar gases is going to be slightly different than what you're going to find in the atmosphere, because the alveoli will contain more carbon dioxide and water vapor than what you're going to find in the atmosphere. Gas exchange happens in the lungs, the air gets humidified, and you're going to have a mixing of alveolar gases with each breath. When you talk about external respiration, we have the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide across the respiratory membrane, which again is going to be the alveolar wall and the wall of the capillaries. That is going to be influenced by these factors: the thickness and the surface area of the respiratory membrane. And remember that in a healthy human being, that is nearly the size of a tennis court when flattened. The partial pressure gradients and the solubilities of various gases, and what's known as ventilation-perfusion coupling. We remember that the respiratory membranes are very thin and have a huge surface area, about 40 times that of skin. If the lungs become waterlogged or edematous, those respiratory membranes will become thicker, which will lead to inadequate gas exchange. You will find reduced surface area in various pathologies, which include emphysema, tumors, and inflammation, and a buildup of mucus. Can anyone think of a condition which might trigger a buildup of mucus? Think about that. One comes to mind, but I want you guys to think about it and figure it out for yourself. When you talk about internal respiration, you're going to have capillary gas exchange at the level of the body tissues. So partial pressures and diffusion gradients are going to be reversed compared to what you find with external respiration. So the partial pressure of oxygen at the tissue level is going to be lower than what you find in systemic arterial blood, which will mean that oxygen will move from blood into tissues. You have more carbon dioxide in tissues than in blood, so that means the carbon dioxide is going to move into the blood to get carried away to the lungs so we can expel it via expiration. How do we transport respiratory gases? Because we got to move oxygen and we have to move carbon dioxide. The majority of oxygen is going to be carried by hemoglobin, and we've talked about this before. So about 98.5% is going to be bound to the iron in hemoglobin. That is a lot. Remember that hemoglobin is a giant protein that can carry 4 oxygen molecules. You have a little bit in plasma, but not a lot. Hypoxia, there's several different types. Let's look at those. If your patient is somewhat blue in skin, you may have inadequate oxygen delivery to the tissues, cyanosis. Anemic hypoxia means that you have too few erythrocytes or abnormal or too small amount of hemoglobin. If you have ischemic hypoxia, you're going to have impaired or blocked circulation. If you have histotoxic hypoxia, there's some sort of metabolic poison that might have kicked in or has been spreading throughout the system, and the cells are actually unable to use oxygen. Hypoxemic hypoxia, you have pulmonary disease and you have abnormal ventilation, and carbon monoxide poisoning, especially from a fire. Sadly, carbon monoxide has a 200 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen. So if an organism that breathes is put into an environment where there's carbon monoxide, that carbon monoxide will bind to those receptors and oxygen will not have the opportunity to bind. That is why it's so lethal and so dangerous. For carbon dioxide transport, about 70% is going to be transported as bicarbonate ions in the plasma. And that is how we prevent ourselves from getting too acidic, because bicarbonate ions help neutralize acidity. About 20% is going to be bound to what's known as carbaminohemoglobin. Sorry, don't do this at 11 o'clock at night. So basically it's bound to the globin of hemoglobin, and about 10%, give or take a little bit, is going to be dissolved in plasma. How do we control respiration? We're going to use higher brain centers, chemoreceptors, and some reflexes. When you talk about neural control, think pons, because there's going to be a pneumotaxic area in the pons, which is going to control the rate of breathing. There will also be areas in the medulla oblongata that are going to be important, because they will help control forceful breathing and the rhythm of breathing. When you talk about chemoreceptors, we'll remember that they are in the carotid arteries and the aorta, and you remember that from the circulatory system and vasculature. That was a test question on the last exam. These guys are going to be sensitive to low levels of oxygen and or high levels of carbon dioxide. Effector sites will include the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, as well as smooth muscles of terminal bronchioles. If you have a bout with hyperventilation or see a patient having a bout with hyperventilation, you have really rapid, really shallow breathing, which will increase oxygen levels. And breathing into a paper bag, which actually helps contain carbon dioxide, helps and normalizes the gas concentrations. What are some of the factors that affect breathing? I would know this slide if I were you. Stretch of tissues, high blood carbon dioxide, and that is probably the most important chemical factor in influencing breathing. I would know that if I were you, hint, hint. Low blood oxygen levels also plays a role. High blood carbon dioxide levels is a little bit more important. Low pH, and some other factors are going to include temperature, pain, and irritation of airways. Chemically speaking, in order, the three chemical factors that are going to really help influence breathing, or will really influence breathing, are in order. Again, high blood pressure, high blood carbon dioxide levels, low blood oxygen levels, and then low pH.